Hello and good morning. It is Eileen Cook. I am here at Happy Hour on March the 6th. So welcome. Before I get started, I was asked a question about crowd scenes. But since you're here, Christy, is there anything that you have a burning desire to know? Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, just to put me on the spot. Yeah, exactly. I like the idea of the crowd scene thing. Yeah, I'm open to anything. Yeah.
Well, we'll jump into that, and then if we have more questions, then we can tackle those as we go.
Great.
So this question came up because one of our members is writing a crowd scene, and she has multiple people in the scene and is just sort of juggling that a little bit and trying to figure out how to do the crowd scene. So asked if there is any kind of, points or tips or things we can talk about. So writing a crowd scene is of course, a bit of a challenge because you have a whole bunch of characters in a small space. So first off, why would you do it in general? Crowds can be nice because they can add tension, good or bad. It can sort of allow you to highlight character quirks because it's maybe how they stand out from a crowd. Crowds can block your character from the goal. It can bring out emotions that might come up with a goal. You can imagine crowds in terms of like family dynamics. Now this is a first. This is Alyssa at the ski hill with goggles on. That's how committed she is to knowing about crowd scenes. I'm waiting for trees to start shooting past her sides as she skis down the hill while listening to this. So I'm just going to give a total call out because that's pretty damn impressive. But that is why people are doing crowd scenes. So you can imagine parties are also great, funerals, weddings. There's a lot of high emotions where we have groups of people together. So that's often why we might have a crowd. You might have a crowd, for example, in a battle scene, which I'm guessing is more likely for Alyssa versus a wedding, but you never know. You might have a crowd at like a graduation, those kinds of things. Parties are often social points, which then are, of course, stressful situations. So anytime you have a group of people together because we're having a family reunion, there's a great time for some nice family dynamics. You're having a work party, another different kind of family dynamics, which I can tell the story of how one of my coworkers at one point broke our Xerox machine in our day job by photocopying his butt. So he jumped up onto the photocopier. And the best part is everyone was denying it. This is just a side story. But they were all like, oh, something fell off the shelf or whatever. So I called the Xerox person the next day, and the Xerox person came to fix the thing. And of course, the first thing it does, it spits out a copy. And the copy is someone's buttocks, of which I knew it had to be one of our male employees because there were testicles involved. And so I was threatening to do a lineup if someone didn't fess up whose buttocks was on the photocopier, and the guilty party was eventually caught. So that is a point of the story to say that party scenes can result in interesting conflicts. So those are some things to do. So some things that might be helpful is first to actually play choreographer. I don't know if anyone here has done high school drama or theater at any point. But one of the very first things that they do is they sort of set up for people your blocking. So they have you sit down and they talk about where everybody's going to be in that moment and what that's going to look like. You can do the same thing. You can get a fancy sheet of graph paper, for example, and you could bring out, if you have little figures, because you're that kind of person, you can have little figures, or you can use something as simple as Smarties. See, Bonnie has little figures, so she can actually make it work. But you can use anything you have and just sort of honestly just block the scene out. Like, where are the people standing? And then thinking about as you're moving them around. So as you're sliding the figure from one place to another, thinking about what is in sight lines. Are things being blocked? Have you blocked an exit? Have you blocked a certain thing so that you can actually see where people are. And that is oftentimes one of the most useful things. I do know that Crystal creates maps of her towns. just so she can sort of keep it straight. I know I have done floor plans of houses before, so I can keep track of where things are. And you can play a little bit of the game of, if something is at this point, would I hear it or be able to see it? Because it can be easy to forget that stuff. So thinking in terms of where people are is really useful. Think about the roles of the people. So who is there and why are they there? Particularly if you're doing a large crowd scene. So let's imagine that you want to have a scene where your character is showing up at a celebration. You're doing a historical novel, so it's VE Day in London, and there's large crowds of people on the street, and you want to show your character kind of moving through this crowd and sort of picking up the things. So thinking about, what are the things that you want to show? So you may want to show, for example, someone who might have been, like, I'm thinking now of Paris, not of London, but in Paris, for example, when VE Day came, and the Allied soldiers came in, there was a lot of, I don't know if I want to say torture, but humiliation of people that had been sympathizers with the Nazis. So several women, for example, who had dated the Nazis had their heads shaved publicly as a sort of shaming kind of thing. And so if you were writing a scene, you might want to show that happening because you want to show people having anger displayed and so forth. So that may be something that you're wanting to sort of demonstrate and show. So thinking, for example, in Alyssa's case, like, what is the point of the people in the different crowd scene? And is there different perspectives that you're wanting to show? Are there different factions that you want to sort of say, this is this? Alyssa,
so I kind of want to show all the people in her tribe and show how they interact with her and how she interacts with them, and then how they kind of come to a group decision about this external threat. So I guess it's not really important who all the other people are because they're mostly minor characters, but I think the important thing is like how they interact, I guess, how they interact with my protagonist.
Well, and then showing that, right? So if I start to speak in that crowd, is it something where other people shush down or other people say, hey, Eileen's talking, right? And that would show like a deference to that, where people like, and why does that not happen more often? Hey, Eileen's talking. That's why I have this fancy mute button on this thing. But where it's that opportunity where you see other people defer to that. Or other people who, are they nodding along, like as someone is talking, would sort of show, again, deference to that person, or, listening to that person, in agreement with that person. And of course, you can imagine how easy it would be to show the opposite of any of that, right? So if people are talking over that person, if they are shaking their heads no, if they are, raising their hands, or sort of, being like, no, that's not happening, that's not okay, and something like that would sort of show the idea that perhaps people are not as in agreement or deference as possible. So thinking about that. So, in Alyssa's case, where she's trying to show the interaction, it's also would be, let us see how she interacts with someone. So is she someone that notices a quiet person who's not getting listened to, who says, hey, we need to hear from Leslie. Everyone be quiet so Leslie can speak, right? And that's kind of, for lack of a better term, almost a little bit of a save the cat moment, where we recognize that, oh, she's the kind of person who welcomes that. Or if someone, scoffs, and then other people are like, hey, be quiet, where, Alyssa again is saying, hey, no, it's important to hear from everybody. I want to hear if you have a disagreement, because that tells me the kind of leader that person is. So it's not just what other people are doing around her, but it is also how she's interacting with other people. So what is it that we want to show that she is able to do, if that makes sense? So it's not just what she says, but her interactions. Christy.
I just had a question relating to this point of view as well. Because I'm thinking in my book, one of the culminating scenes is a crowd scene at Nick's gallery when it's showing and the secrets are out and everybody has to kind of face each other. But it's done through Sam's point of view. And I think, like most of us, Sam's pretty self-centered and just kind of sees what he wants to see. So all this nonsense can be going on around him, but he's only seeing this. So unless you're writing your scene from an omniscient point of view, that's tricky too, isn't it?
It is. And you might have another character, for example, point that out to him. So that's often, if you're in one person's point of view, is to sort of, go over and have, for example, Bonnie say, Christy, I know you're worried about this, but have you noticed this, this, and this? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't realize. So that can sometimes be a way to pull the reader's attention, or have something where the reader notices it, but the character does not. So that can sometimes work. Yes. So Bonnie has some comments. So one, she has a dragon. She likes dragon nodding. So dragons are very agreeable, apparently, with a good leader. But yeah, and a tendency sometimes in a crowd scene is to be like, everyone around her nodded, that kind of thing. But again, the point of view character focuses in on and what they notice can be useful. I think a good, useful thing is to play director again. So not even just with choreography of a crowd scene, but sort of backing up, which is, useful to do as a writer in general, and sort of say, what is the point of this scene? Like, what is it I'm trying to accomplish in this scene? And then how can the different players in this scene help me work that? So, the purpose of this crowd scene is I want to show that my character is a strong leader, that she's listening to everyone, and that they have agreed on this particular plan. So kind of once you know the objectives, then you can sort of be like, okay, how do I want to show that that is what happens? So is there initially a lot of disagreement? So you have people shouting ideas over each other, and you might even have like a very staccato kind of dialogue, we must rush the monument. No, to go into battle is crazy. To do this is this. To do this is this. And so you have people kind of quickly going back and forth, back and forth. And then we have our main character sort of bring the calm in and sort of show the storm and pull it all together. So taking a minute, which again is useful advice, not just for a crowd scene, but for any scene, about what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? And then how can I use the different players in this scene to accomplish that? Marianne has a really good point as well, which is, again, just to help us go deep into point of view as well. But what is it that your point of view character is noticing? And of course, as we talk about in all the backstory and all of that, everything is filtered through your character's point of view. And my dog agrees with that and or is upset that someone's walking past. So what is their bias? What is their point of view? What are they noticing? Are they irritated? So again, going back to Alyssa's example, like as people are disagreeing, is she fighting the, urge to be irritated, where we see her want to sort of slam down, like, geez, Bonnie, stick it. Like, we can't have this discussion going on right now. But she recognizes, oh, if I try and shut down Bonnie, then we're going to have, a different kind of difficulty. So I need to, at least appear calm to Bonnie, because otherwise she's that person. She's going to fly off the handle and I'm going to lose her. So, are we seeing a character kind of argue with their own instincts about what they might want to do versus what they know they need to do? Or conversely, do they lose that battle? So they can't help but roll their eyes when Bonnie says something. And then Bonnie notices and throws her Tinkerbell mug, as she's wont to do. And we have a scene where all of a sudden, like, I know I should have, forgotten that, but I didn't. Yes, you got to watch out for Bonnie. She's super reactive all the time. Stay out of her. Like, this is why we do it online, because she throws things. So that's why. But thinking about not only, their internal thought, if you have that point of view character, but what that may be battling, like what they're noticing, what they're thinking, what they may choose to comment on, and what they may choose to not comment on. So again, I'm going to give a kudos to Marianne in the chat window for people who might be following it, which is really useful, which is always remembering that everyone in the scene has a point. They have a reason that they are there, which is not just the reason that you want them there. There's the reason you want them there. So I want these women who are being accused of being sympathizers with the Nazis because I want to show that the crowd is not just jubilant, but angry. And there's all this rage that has built up after being occupied by the Nazis. And that even though we're the good guys, we can also be cruel, right? So the idea of, shaming women and shaving their heads is, something that we hope we would be above and beyond. But I want to show that cruelty. But the people who are there and doing it are not there for that reason. They're not like, perhaps we should show the other side of the occupation by doing something cruel, so that people, they don't know that. They are there because they have something that they are trying to accomplish, and they are angry, and they have, maybe, what has driven them there. So thinking about that, particularly if they're characters who are going to be having speaking roles in all of that. So if they have something that they're going to be saying, thinking really clear about that, right? So why is it that they're bringing something up? What is their agenda? What is it that they're trying to do? Why do they believe that that is important? Particularly if you're going to have people arguing about what is the next best course of action, thinking about what is their reason for doing it will sort of help you make that realistic. So let's make it a very low stakes issue. So you have a bunch of characters arguing about where they're going to go for dinner. And you're doing that because you have one character who really wants to go to the Italian place because that's where the cute waiter works, and that's where you want to have the meet cute. So you want this little scene where they debate about where we go. So we think it's like, oh my gosh, what luck that they ended up at the Italian place. So we're going to have people arguing about where to go. That if someone doesn't have a good reason for being like, no, we really want to have Chinese, then it seems like a kind of wasted thing. So having a moment where it's like, I really want to have Chinese, and it's because I'm gluten intolerant. And if I go to the Italian place, it's just brutal for me because I love pasta, will add a different edge to the argument, even if it's not necessarily shown on the page. So thinking about why it is that they want those things. Keep track of who the reader needs to know is in that scene. So if you just have a big crowd and it's not really important who those individual people are, so they're all small secondary characters and it's not so important. But if it's going to be important later that we remember that Leslie was in that crowd and she was one of the people that was shaving heads of the, sympathizers, then make sure that you're mentioning her name. Make sure that the point of view characters may be noticing, like, I never thought Leslie would be out here, or I could see the rage in Leslie's eyes because they had the Nazis had killed her sister, and so this is now personal for her. Something where, again, we're marking and noticing who is there. The other note that I have for myself is thinking about reaction time. So making sure that you have that pause. So we have a chance to sort of see how people are responding, what those things are. I had class last night with the SFU crowd. And one of the things that we were talking about was finding that balance. So the balance between dialogue, narration, description, setting, and that some people tended to sort of almost rotate through, like, first I'm going to describe where we are, and then it's going to be a couple scenes of dialogue, and then I'll have an emotional reaction, and then it's going to be another block of dialogue, and then I will wrap up this scene with another thing of setting. And that what you're trying to do, of course, is weave those things all together. Boy, this is what happens when you try and connect from the ski hill. Alyssa's noticing that she can't actually do it. But I just still want to give her kudos because I just love that she tried. I have to be like, I would just be skiing. So have a wonderful ski. And I hope that in the replay, if you have questions, you can let me know. But what you are trying to do is weave all those things together. So you have a little bit of setting. And you can do those things together. So if I'm trying to show at a party that I'm anxious and nervous at the party, you might have me picking at the couch that I'm sitting on. And I could describe that it's like an unbelievably ugly floral print. And so I'm picking at the threads on the floral print. So that gives a little bit of setting. And I might even talk about how the whole room feels claustrophobic because everything is, there's floral wallpaper and floral sofa, and a bunch of the people are wearing print dresses, and it's just this accost. So I'm getting my feelings on things as well as some description. And then you can have a character sit down and say something. Like, you can sort of just keep building that. You can even add to the tension because I'm picking at the sofa, and the next thing that happens is that I poke a tiny hole in it, and I can see it starting to unravel, and all I can think of is, oh my God, I just poked a hole in my boss's sofa, and what's going to happen with that, and those kinds of things. So it can add to conflict. So you're always trying to look at how to weave things together, which is also what Bonnie's talking about in the chat window, where she said, you know, what you want to avoid saying is, "We must go to the bar," Eileen declared. Christy rolled her eyes. Marianne clapped. Bonnie threw her hands up in the air. Like, you don't want to do sort of this roll call where every, you know, and then I say something else, and then we go back through the group to see how everyone responded to that. You can sort of decide if you want to group those things together, break them up depending on whose reaction, right? So I may not, in terms of Christy's thing, so you might have something like, Christy rolled her eyes, but Eileen didn't notice because she was clapping along with Marianne. So if you're wanting to sort of show that in the point of view character, I'm all like, we're going to the bar. And meanwhile, Christy's like, I can't believe we're going to the bar. It's not even 9:30, although it's really close. So it's noon on the East Coast, people. So we're sort of doing that kind of thing where you might want to be showing, which you can do in third person, right? So Christy rolled her eyes, but Eileen didn't even notice because she was too busy clapping along with Marianne. So that is something where then the reader notices that not everybody is excited about this bar trip as Eileen and Marianne are. The writers are always excited about the bar trip. So Alyssa had a question before she went out. So we'll go to that and then go to Leslie's. But Alyssa said, can you please cover how to write minor characters in the scene so the protagonist knows, but they aren't important to the rest of the story? So some of that might be by their role instead of their name. So, or quickly noticing both. So Eileen looked over, she saw that Christy was there. She hadn't seen Christy since the SFU group. You know, she should know that Christy would represent the other students in the group. So that might be a way of sort of just, and then we might just go back to the students. So that might be something that would stick out for the protagonist so that they're pointing it out. Sometimes the more details you give, the more I think that that's someone who should be important. So if we say, Eileen noticed Marianne, her glasses, her blonde bob, her blacks. Like if we start listing a whole bunch of details, then I think like, oh, it's really important that I imprint on Marianne. If we stick to her role, then I'm more likely to understand that she's a secondary character and less important. Not that Marianne isn't important. So that can be, Marianne gives me that eye though, that side eye. Do you see that? That will help people sort of know what might be going on with that. Yeah, that's how I would sort of cover how minor characters are. I would sort of skip around or group them together. So there's a group of students, or there's a group of people from that. There's a people from the village that I know, people that I went to school with, those kinds of things. And yes, so Marianne's putting out a round point of view as well, which is if we're doing what Christy's talking about, like depending how deep you are in the point of view, if the character doesn't notice something, you might distance that person, right? Did you want to talk about that further, Marianne, before I?
Only that I've just decided to do this Facebook 5-day course on deep POV with Lisa Hall Wilson, and I was reading some stuff last night, and she just was critiquing a few samples, and that was one of the things she pointed out that people often do. They want the reader to be aware of something in the room or some person in the room, but it's not important to the point of view character, or they actually want the point of view character not to notice it, that there was a gun on the mantelpiece. But if you say the character didn't notice the gun on the mantelpiece, you make the reader aware of the gun, but you also distance them from the point of view character, because you're having an omniscient moment, obviously. So it's just, you have to be clear on your objectives, and if you want that emotional connection and that deep point of view, you can't. My big problem starting out with writing was that, coming from an environmental design background, I wanted to describe every detail in the entire landscape and in the entire room. And clearly no character is taking that in at any moment in time, and they're not relevant. So I had to slowly, wean myself of that habit. But it's the same idea as saying that the character didn't notice something. Because if you're in that character's virtual reality goggles, you can't mention it.
Yeah.
So you find another way. So that's what I was talking about with Christy. If you want something to come into the viewfinder of the point of view character, somebody else can force it. Somebody else can come along and say, hey, whatever, these bills need to be paid or whatever. And, but the point of view character can be interested in something else and say, go away, I'll deal with that later, or I don't care about that. So.
Or they can notice it, but not necessarily put the right meaning on it.
Yeah.
Right. So they notice the gun on the mantelpiece, but they don't in any way feel threatened by it. Like they think somebody's a cop, and so it's just their service revolver. Like there's something else where you may have something where they see it, but they don't necessarily put the correct meaning on it. That will happen.
Yeah. If you're dropping clues for some reason. Yeah.
Let's go to Leslie. She had a question.
And actually that ties very nicely into that, Marianne. Thank you very much, because that was my understanding, is that when you're in a deep third point of view and you want someone's reaction to happen and not have your POV person see that, well, you can't, right? Because they're not seeing it, therefore they can't notice it, or the reader isn't privy to that. If you're writing, I guess, a distant third, you could do that, but you can't do that in deep third, right? Is that right?
Oh, I was muting myself and then unmuting myself. If you're truly in the really deep third, no. And if you're struggling with that, just write it in first and then switch it back. That's a sneaky way to kind of sometimes see how deep you are in that. I think you will see people who are generally writing a deep point of view who will have a moment or two where they pull back slightly because they want to get something in and they need to have it in. And so that's sort of like, if you want to think of a camera lens, where like generally you're really focused and then we're going to pull back and then focus again. You do run the risk that you're pulling the reader slightly out emotionally in that moment, but if you really need to get that thing in, then that is a way to sort of slide it in. The more you do it, the more you're pulling the reader out. So it's the kind of thing where you might be trying to say, like, I'm going to do this judiciously, or only in those moments where I really need to sort of pull back slightly. Marianne.
Or find another way to do it.
Or find another way.
Yeah.
So it's all going to depend on your scene and sort of what the setup is about how viable is it for them to know. So if you have your characters the only one in the room and you don't want them to notice something, and then someone else isn't going to be able to bring that up. So is it something that's going to come up later? Is it something that was in an earlier scene so the reader knows that that thing is still there and they're waiting to see if your character is going to notice it? So in an earlier scene, if you're doing, for example, rotating point of view, so scene 1 is in Christy's point of view, and I'm going to have her put the gun on the mantelpiece, and then she leaves, and scene 2 is in Marianne's point of view, and we're in the same room. Then as the reader, I know the gun is on the mantelpiece, and I may be like, notice it, Marianne, notice it, but she may not. So that is another way that you could do that. If Marianne's in the room with Leslie, then it's possible Leslie might be like, holy cow, is that a gun? And going on from that. Those are all some options that you might work with. Christy, you had a question, and then we'll go back to Leslie.
Oh, it was just that same kind of thing of misinterpretation of information. And I know that, like, Sam does that all the time, that he sees stuff around him, but again, his vision is so skewed that he'll think, oh, that's what that means. And it's not until later, when more clues are revealed or somebody bashes him over the head with the information, he's like, oh, I didn't know that. That's what Nico meant, that kind of. So that's sort of how I'm playing with him a little bit.
Well, and I think misunderstanding information is a classic that you see over and over and over again. And the fun is whether or not you want the reader to sort of be along with that, or whether or not the reader is maybe coming to a different conclusion. So certainly in mystery, what we often want is the reader to be along with that main character and making the same assumptions. And then later getting another piece of information that makes them go back, just as probably we all have, where you have that moment where you're like, oh, wait a minute. I thought this, but now I'm starting to get that bad feeling that maybe I totally misread that situation, and I wish I had not done that. Or conversely, like you'll see in a lot of like chick litty, romantic comedy kinds of things, you see the character and you're deep in their point of view, so you understand what mistake that they're making. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I just saw him kissing his cousin, blah, 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 blah. And we all kind of know, like, oh, it's, you know, well, of course, you wouldn't think it was his cousin. I can't believe he was kissing another woman. Yeah, if he's kissing his cousin, it's a whole other issue. You know, and then we all kind of know as the reader, like, this is going to be a misunderstanding, and I bet she's seeing it the wrong way. And it's all the foibles of like, when is she going to catch on to that particular thing? So that will work. So Leslie, did I skip something you were going to say that was smart and genius?
No, I had this brief flash of, oh, I know how to fix that scene where I've gone back in time. And then when I sat back, I'm like, no, I didn't. So, all good.
So there was that moment of genius that came and went, as they so often do. I had the other day, I had a thing where I was like, oh, I know this exact plot for a book. And then like 2 seconds later, I realized like how it would all fall apart in 2 seconds. But as soon as they knew this, then there's no mystery anymore. So it was very exciting for a moment where I was like, I have found the perfect plot. And then it went away before I even knew it. It came, it went. It was a brief moment. Other thoughts on crowd scenes? Anything we haven't thought of? Thinking of the crowd as part of your setting, I think, is useful. So, you know, is it something that feels exciting? So again, just like we might describe a room as feeling calm and serene, and it could be the same room and you could describe it as sort of cold and clinical, sort of depending on the feeling of your character. So thinking about how someone feels within a crowd, again, if you are going to change points of view, so you might have one person walk in and they're describing the party as hot and it smells like too much Indian food that had been ordered, and, you know, loud braying laughter. So we totally get the idea that, you know, Bonnie is hating this party and she would do just about anything to get out of there. And then we change points of view and we have Marianne come into the party and she's talking about like, it's full of life. It's like a carnival. Everyone's having a great time. And we realize like, this is the same party and it's very different perspectives on what we think of that party. So you can play with that as an interesting thing to sort of think about how different people are responding within the same space. Just as you're constantly, hopefully, using your setting as a way of, you know, is this a place where your character feels really comfortable or uncomfortable? And it tells us a lot about that. Like, if you see someone bound onto stage, right, and they're talking in front of a group of 300 people, and they're, you know, doing stuff and they feel right at home and the spotlight feels warm and welcoming, that tells you stuff about that character. like they're crazy for one, but clearly also an extrovert. But someone else may have that moment, right, where they're getting up on the same stage, and they might feel competent and capable, but they also might be really nervous or anxious. And the spotlight feels really hot, and they're wondering if people can tell that they're sweating. And, you know, like a million and one different eyes on you. And how that, you know, again, is the same situation, but how people interpret that situation is really different. And so again, if you're doing a crowd scene, like, or looking around a party scene, like, how are different people responding to that, or how you can use that? So for example, if you're writing a family reunion scene, or any kind of family gathering, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, I'm open, right? I always think it's sort of interesting if you're trying to write someone's interaction with their family, how they will feel in that space. So is it something where they're painfully aware that everyone else in their family is wearing Land's End pastel colored cardigans and they're all in goth? So they can feel, you know, Aunt Kathy giving them the side eye. And do they feel comfortable with that? Like, do they feel really good? Like, stick it, Aunt Kathy, right? Like, that's right, I pierced my nose. Or is it something that they feel really uncomfortable with? Is it something that they feel warm and welcome? Like, this is my people. And it's, you know, there's Uncle George telling the same joke that he tells at every single family event, and everyone laughs at it because he's now 85 and we all just sort of go with it. Like, what is the dynamics will tell you so much about those different people and how they're interacting. Christy.
I love this. This is so great. It reminds me, and your sort of picking at the couch thing made me think of this. It was one of the Actors Studios programs, and they were celebrating Dame Maggie Smith, who's, you know, an incredible actor. And so they had a bunch of different actors coming out and talking about their experiences with her in various scenarios. And a lot of them had been, I think it was at one of the universities in New York, where it was an actors gang, and they were all asked to do this scene. And basically the scene, you were the only person on the stage, and there was a table and chair. And you had the same lines that you would deliver. And so each of the students came up, and so some of them, you know, did it kind of, you know, loud and create, like, how do you be noticed was kind of the query of this. And so then Dame Maggie Smith comes up, and she just sort of becomes this other person as she hobbles across the stage, and then sits down, and then just starts kind of picking at her clothes, saying nothing. And then very quietly, as she's kind of becoming this visual being that you have no idea she was before, and then she delivers this line so quietly. And it was just so profound as a writer to see that, and how you can make small things big. Yeah, I loved it.
I think there is a tendency to think that we have to go big. Not just actors, but writers as well, that we need these, you know, major reactions. So, you know, I want to show that somebody is angry, right? And so I have them throw their Tinkerbell mug, and I have them scream, and I have them do all these things. But sometimes, you know, someone who might be quietly seething with rage, right? Where we see a very small thing, like, you know, they're holding something, and you see they break a pencil that's held in their fist, or something where we're like, wow, like, they're truly livid. But it's contained can sometimes be that much stronger thing, right? And you can also add to the conflict with that, where I think sometimes when we go quiet, you sort of force people to lean in and listen. And I find that a very interesting thing. I find watching elementary school teachers very intriguing with how they get a group of children's attention. And there's different schools of thought. So there are definitely people who get really loud and like pull the kids together. But I knew one teacher who would just stop talking and she would just stand silently, right? And so there would be like kind of this loud thing, and then they would all sort of stop. And that would be that kind of moment where like, oh, that's an interesting way how that does that. So Monty says setting for quiet moments, but yeah, setting in like high stress moments is also useful because it can sort of add to that feeling. And again, I'll go back to the party scene as someone who hates being at parties where I don't know anyone. Or I know very few people. Like I tend to, like, I find those really, I feel like everyone notices, like, but I tend to be hyper aware of that surrounding because I'm trying to figure out like, okay, where can I sit? Like, is there a group that looks like they're very tightly all clustered together? So you would have to kind of stand on the outside of the circle and be like, so what are you guys talking about? Or is there a group that looks like it's a little more open, or God willing, is there somebody who's sitting by themselves that I can sit down next to? So sometimes you're almost hyper aware in those situations, or you're trying to distract yourself because you are so angry. Looking for doors, very, very viable option. I've been known to ghost parties where I sort of walk through and then just sort of walk out. And maybe nobody will notice that I've left because I find them anxiety producing. But you can also imagine sometimes where you might take in a scene like just before you blow. So those of you who are parents or dog owners maybe, where like you come into a room and then there's a moment and then you notice the, thing that got spilled on the floor, and that the couch has a hole in it, and that someone has knocked over the TV, and there's this long thing, right? And you're just sort of, and you can feel your anger building as you sort of take in each individual thing, and then you're going to blow potentially, or maybe you're going to like, your fist, it's like, I will knock my kids into next week and I need to walk out of this room, or I'm going to not handle this very well. So that can be a way of sort of thinking about how people will react. But I love that example, Christy. Like, we can always go with Maggie Smith when in doubt. Sometimes going small is big. Marianne is raising, I don't know what you're talking about, Marianne. I would never do this. Never kick the dog. But like, if you're really angry yell at your husband, sure, but don't kick the dog. But if you are really angry at one person, it is not uncommon to sort of take that out on someone else, or it boils over. I don't know if you've ever had that where you're not having a great day, and then one person will do something that's actually a relatively small thing, and it just becomes the thing where like, now at that point, you no longer can take one more thing. So it's that you've had a shitty day, and then there's that person who cuts in front of you with blinking easily 22 items in their cart in the 15 item line. And like, you just, and again, whether or not, maybe you don't say anything, but you're that thing where you're just like, what is wrong with you? Like, as opposed to thinking like, maybe they didn't count their items. Maybe it's, they're not aware they're in the line, or maybe it's okay. Yes. Yelling at people who don't have it coming is a very common thing, because it is safe to yell. This is why it sucks to work in customer service, because you are that person that people feel comfortable taking it out on, right? I remember being at a restaurant just last week or whatever, and the waitress put down the coffee, and the person like lost it, was like screaming, like, how many times do I have to say that I want creamer with my coffee? You don't bring it, I can't drink it. Now it's gonna be forever till you bring creamer. Now it's gonna get cold. La 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 la. Like, is it too much to ask that I get creamer with my coffee? And you could see the waitress just staring at him in this way where it's like, dude, it's creamer. Like, let's take it down. Like, the table one over leaned over and passed him creamer. Like, the guy was just losing it. And I think the waitress was not very upset. Like, I think she's probably been a waitress for a long time. So she had that look like, eat it, right? Like, I'm totally going to spit in your hash browns later, which probably did happen. They get their revenge. But she knew it wasn't about her. Like, whatever was going on for him was not about the fact that creamer didn't come when she put the coffee down. It was clearly something else. And so again, thinking as a writer, that's a way that you can show that moment where you have a character lose it at someone else. And then, do they have the insight? Like, do they feel bad when the waitress walks away, knowing, oh my God, I can't believe, like, that was not about the creamer? Or do they honestly feel, and I think we all have been there, where you feel truly righteously livid, like, you can't believe it, like millennials, like they can't get service for anything, right? And like later, either someone else again points that out to you, like, again, if you've ever had that moment where someone's like, seriously, you're that upset about creamer? And you realize like, oh, it's not about that, right? So you have that thing. So drivers, yeah, this is why any of us who've ever worked in customer service, you know that feeling where someone just loses it all around, and it's not necessarily your fault. I cried several times as a waitress, and I may or may not have spit in someone's hash browns as a waitress, around like just having to deal with that kind of thing. But people will allow their emotions to kind of come out when it's safe. So that is a fun way to do it. And again, in a crowd scene, you can sort of show other people's reaction. So if my point of view character is the one who is losing it and is like, I can't believe they didn't bring the creamer, and every time, like, is it asking too much that one thing in my life go well, that I can have a decent cup of coffee, right? And so I'm screaming and yelling, and then I'm noticing the people around me are, giving me the stink eye, and I notice that the waitress is crying, and I start to have that moment where it's like, great. Now, and again, if I'm deep in my point of view, the reader might be like, oh, you've kind of lost it. But if I want to stay in my point of view, I might be like, who do these people think they are judging me? Like, they all got what they wanted. Now they're going to think I'm the bad guy. Maybe the waitress should suck it up and not cry over her job. So that's a way to sort of stay in my point of view, where again, the reader might have the feeling of, oh, I still think you're losing it, when maybe you shouldn't be losing it. So that's another way of sort of sneaking it in, as Marianne's talking about. So for people who watch later, there's all sort of sad stories of people as they lived in their day jobs, slipping people the wrong food and various things, and how there should be lines on the road because that's what they're there for. Any other questions about crowd scenes or anything else before we wrap up for a Wednesday morning? We hide the chats on the recordings, but we do save them, so be careful. So that if we have resources, we can make sure that we can find them again, because sometimes they get mentioned in the chat window and we forget to list them, but we do hang on to them, so they're saved in a top secret locale. All right, I will remind people that Christy, it's because I'm looking at her, that Crystal will not have Christy won't have office hours tonight either, but neither will Crystal. She is still recovering, so she is out this week in general and sleeping some 18 hours a day until she gets better. But she is recovering, so I am happy to report that she is starting to feel a little bit better. So drugs are an amazing thing. Take them when you need to. All right. Going once, going twice. All right. I hope everybody has a great day. Leslie, if you want to stay in here, or you can leave and come back, but I'll need like 5 minutes to just do a couple things, but I will be back. Up to you. Everyone else, you got to get the heck out. Okay. All right. I'll be back in 1 minute.